monsters, welcome to another podcast episode and official meeting of our true crime cult. But never fear, you've landed in the cult with all of the cool jumpsuits and none of the doomsday prophecies. In case you don't know us already, allow us to introduce ourselves. I'm your favorite true crime pixie, Angelina, and I'm here with the real housewife of true crime herself, Aurora. How's your week going?
Oh, it's going.
Yeah.
Nothing too excited to report here, but how about you?
I have nothing exciting to report. I've been like, my work ever since the pandemic started, I guess, has been really rocky. And it's been like, I'll have some random weeks where I have nothing at all on the go inexplicably. And then some random weeks where I'm just swamped and I have to take it to make up for the alternating shit weeks. So I've been in one of those really busy weeks. And so the week disappeared. I got nothing to say. It's hot. I'm tired. That's it. But
I get that. My week actually kind of disappeared too. Like I was so proud for being ahead of schedule on some of our MMN stuff. Like I recorded a couple of TikToks ahead of time, and I like really had a great week last week. And I was like, I'm going to get my story done so early. It's going to be done on Friday. And then I ended up watching like 6 documentaries on kind of like loosely on the subject of my story, like quite meandering on Friday. Yeah. So like instead of sitting and writing, I was like, I would like to have more knowledge on this loosely related subject. So I just did that.
And really, like that's the perk for us personally when it comes to recording the podcast is that we're learning more and more about things that we're actually really interested in. So it's like you want to have like a very like quick, concise story and be like, this is just straightforward and really easy to deliver. But then you're also kind of like into it when you get into a story and realize that it's way more in depth than you realized. You're like, this is going to be a mountain to write, but like still very fascinating.
Absolutely. And there can be like so many political tie-ins and such. And that's like the case with this one. And I won't like give any spoilers just yet because we'll dive in. But yeah, so I have a lot of good recommendations on documentaries as a result.
Amazing.
But I also did not finish my story until late last night. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah. Oh, well.
We consider you to be honorary monsters just because you keep tuning into our show week after week. But if you'd like to make it official, you'll want to find us on Patreon. Head over to patreon.com/MurderMurderNews and pledge any amount you like to show your support. To show how much we appreciate you, we'll send you some murder merch goodies, give you a shout out on the show, and you'll get exclusive access to our regular patron-only video specials.
Just a note also to say that as an extra special treat for our patrons, we're now releasing raw, unedited video versions of our weekly podcast episodes. So make sure you check our Patreon page each Friday to catch all of our bloopers, extended banter, and get a little glimpse behind the scenes at MMN.
Let's kick things off with a little look at some of the true crime stories that are making headlines this week.
Michael Baltimore, a star from 90 Day Fiancé, has been added to U.S. Marshals' most wanted list. Michael, who appeared on the 4th season of the reality show, has been accused of a murder. Allegedly, he shot his former employer, Kendall Jerome Cook, at Cook's GQ Barbershop in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, on May 22, 2021. Police said that a personal conflict between Baltimore and Cook led to the shooting. The Marshals are offering a $25,000 reward for information leading to his capture. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms has also offered a $10,000 reward, along with the Cumberland County Crime Stoppers offering $2,000 for any information.
Craig Robinson, who played Daryl on The Office, was forced to cancel his comedy show Saturday night after an active shooter made an appearance at the venue in the Comedy Zone in Charlotte, North Carolina. Around 9:15 p.m., a man pointed a firearm at audience members and made threats of bodily harm. Before the shooter opened fire, the comedy club was evacuated. Police moved Robinson to a nearby theater, the Charlotte Metro Credit Union Amphitheater, while authorities handled the situation. Shortly after, police arrested the suspect and took him into custody. When the unidentified man was booked, authorities found that he had a prior felony conviction.
It seems bizarre to attack a comedy club. Like, what motive could you possibly have for that?
Yeah, I'd really like to know more about the situation. If it was like this person has a concealed like weapon because they're just carrying it and they had a fight with somebody during the show, if they'd been drinking, if this was a planned
or did
thing.
they plan it?
Yeah. And I admittedly did not dig any deeper into what had happened there because, as I mentioned, I was a little behind in my regular story this week, but I'd be curious to look at a little further into that.
Yeah. We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our fellow Darkcast podcasts.
Hi there, nerdlings. I'm Ash.
And I'm Nat. We're the host of Crime Time Nerds, a podcast that focuses on lesser-known investigations, unsolved cases, serial killers, and small-town crimes. Join us as we pick up our flashlights and begin our search for answers as we venture down those dark, true crime paths together.
Join us every Sunday as we explore the nature of these often heinous and heartbreaking cases. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts. You can visit our website at crimetimenerds.com or follow our social media platforms. Don't forget to trust your gut, and we hope you join us each and every week.
And we're back. Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to murdermurdernews@gmail.com and we'll make it right.
Some specific trigger warnings for this episode include rape, racism, drug use, graphic descriptions of violence, and suicide. If any of those are particularly sensitive subjects for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
11 years ago today, Anthony Sowell, known as the Cleveland Strangler, was found guilty of 84 counts, including the kidnapping, rape, and murders of 11 women between 2007 to 2009. The bodies of his victims were found in his home in Mount Pleasant, Cleveland, which many now refer to as a house of horrors. Get ready to get upset because Anthony had many more rape victims than the 11 he killed, most of which went to the police, and only one of them was actually taken seriously, allowing him to continue his killing spree. When families went to report missing loved ones, they were told their daughter or mom would be back home when the drugs ran out, or that adults are allowed to disappear. Cleveland police did little to investigate the disappearances of the 11 women who were murdered. Anthony strategically hunted women who were addicted to crack because he believed no one would care or notice. But as he found out during the powerful victim impact statements read at his trial, he could not be more wrong. These women all had families and lives before being lured into his home, and they were loved and cared about. Their families were determined to bring Anthony to justice. Our sources for today include House of Horrors, The Shocking True Story of Anthony Sowell by Robert Spermna, The Plain Dealer, Nobody's Women, The Crimes and Victims of Anthony Sowell by Steve Miller, Unseen, a documentary, and more. Both books and the documentary were such rich sources for interviews with survivors and stories about the victims that we highly recommend checking them out. For a full list of our sources, check out our show notes.
Before we dive in, let's talk a bit about the crack era and its impact on BIPOC communities and how it created a hunting ground for Anthony Sowell. Between 1982 and 1984, the amount of cocaine arriving in the U.S. increased by 50%. This caused a surplus of product for dealers, which in turn led to a big price drop. Up until this time, coke was expensive and was seen as a rich person's drug. It was inaccessible. With the new surplus of product, dealers looked for a way to repackage the drug to increase profits. They started making a smokable version that was more of a rush than cocaine, but would wear off after 10 to 15 minutes. They would sell it in small quantities, and the rush effect, along with its quick impact, made it more addictive. It could be sold for cheaper than cocaine, which is what allowed it to trickle into inner-city, poorer communities. This had a devastating effect on BIPOC neighborhoods, as its addictive nature led to more job loss, more poverty, and more crime. This was just one piece of the puzzle that led to a huge leap in income disparity in the U.S. during the 80s. Reagan and Bush thus spearheaded the concept of the war on drugs and the mass incarceration of BIPOC people as a result of the extensive criminalization.
Crack was used as a weapon targeted at Black people, and in 1986, the U.S. Congress passed laws that created a 100-to-1 sentencing disparity for the possession of trafficking of crack when compared to the penalties for powder cocaine. 82% of the people convicted for a federal crack and cocaine offense were Black, even though only 30% of crack and cocaine users were Black. In 1980, just before the beginning of the crack era, there were about 40,000 incarcerations due to drug offenses. In 2018, there were 443,200. Currently, 1 in every 5 people incarcerated in the U.S. are jailed for a drug offense. Of course, once one has a felony, it's hard to bounce back to normal life. You can no longer vote, and it's hard to get loans or a job. The concept of a crackhead or crack mama became demonized on TV, and the trope of a Black woman selling her baby to buy the drug became a thing. We will see this trope played out in the case of Anthony Sowell, who, while he sold and did crack himself, he often told his victims he was seeking them out because they were addicted to crack and not taking care of their families. There's a sharp contrast to the way the opioid crisis, affecting mostly white people, is being handled today versus the criminalization of crack in the 80s. Of course, the criminalization of drugs impacting BIPOC communities is super complex, so we suggest checking out the wonderful documentaries 13th or Crack, Cocaine, Corruption, and Conspiracy for a deeper dive.
Back to our case. 21-year-old Melvette was 3 months pregnant with her third child in July of 1989. Melvette was one of 14 children and had grown up without her father in Arkansas. When she was little, her mom, Aretha, married a military man, Richard, who was a great father-like figure for Melvette. He taught her to ride a bike, talked about his time living in Vietnam, and provided for her and her family. When she was just 3, Richard decided he wanted to get out of the South, and he moved Melvette and her family from Pine Bluff, Arkansas, to Cleveland, Ohio. She remembered all of the lights in the city seeming like a carnival. She said it was lit up like a merry-go-round at the county fair. They lived in a nice neighborhood that had once been nicknamed Millionaire's Row, with lots of mansions and all-white neighborhoods, according to Melvette. But at some point, the wealthy neighbors started to move out of the city into the suburbs, and Melvette said the neighborhood started to get more seedy, with criminals moving in and police turning the other way. At some point, her mom split from Richard, and Melvette found herself living on the street. She dropped out of high school at age 16, and she started doing drugs and drinking. She had her first child around this time.
In July of 1989, she was living with a boyfriend and 3 months pregnant. On the night of July 21st, she drove her boyfriend's Cadillac Eldorado to some bars in East Cleveland to meet up with friends. Around 6 a.m. on the morning of the 22nd, she headed to a hotel where her boyfriend was working selling drugs. When she got to the parking lot, she saw some cars she thought were likely police cars. She didn't want to get involved with whatever was going on at the hotel, so she parked her car and walked over to a payphone to plan her next move. As soon as she walked to the phone, a man just appeared out of the blue, almost like a genie. Melvette assumed he was there buying drugs and stopped to chat. She said he was a good talker. She'd been nervous about the police showing up at the hotel, but the stranger calmed her down. He was an ex-Marine and in good shape. Melvette had to leave the car at the motel for her boyfriend, and this charming man offered to give her a ride home. His car was parked just a block away. They both used crack, and he had talked about getting some together, but they decided it was too dangerous with all the cops around. She was enjoying chatting with this man, Anthony, and she was a little buzzed from going out with friends, so she went to his home at 1878 Page Avenue. Inside, a family lived there, and it smelled like freshly baked cornbread. There were kids running around. It felt safe. They went up to the attic, which served as an apartment.
She had not thought about having sex with him. He was engaging and charming, and she really just liked his energy. But once up in his room, Anthony's face changed as his eyes went dark, and Melvette thought to herself, "Sister, you're in trouble." Anthony locked the door and moved a heavy suitcase over to block her way out. Suddenly, he was holding a knife. For the next 12 hours, Melvette was raped, gagged, choked, and beaten. He would toy with her, telling her to strip down, then making her get dressed again. He choked her until she was unconscious and then waited for her to wake back up to start the process over. He tied her hands behind her back and stuffed a towel in her mouth to keep her quiet. Melvette attempted to dissociate, thinking to herself over and over again, The blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus, the blood of Jesus. When Anthony got tired, he told her, "You might as well say your prayers because I'm going to kill you." He said he was too tired to kill her just yet, and he needed to take a nap first. When she was sure Anthony was sleeping, she planned her escape. There was a small window in the room leading out to the roof. Her thoughts flashed to a time when she was a kid and her mom would let her climb out onto their roof to look at the nighttime sky. They were 3 stories up, but if she was going to die anyway, she would rather do it on her terms.
She was still tied, so she rolled off the bed to climb out of the window. When she fell out of the bed, the thud was so loud, she was sure she had woken him, and he would punish her for trying to escape. Anthony kept snoring. She made it to the window and out onto the roof. It was dark outside at this point, and Melvette spotted 2 women across the street. They didn't understand that she needed help at first, but when she turned to show them she was bound, they called the police. Soon a fire truck was there to get her from the roof, and an ambulance arrived to take her away. She was badly injured. Andy had cut her, beat her, and raped her. Anthony was arrested and charged with Melvette's rape, but after making bail, he disappeared. Anthony Sowell was one of 7 children in his family, born in Cleveland on August 19, 1959. His mother, Claudia, worked as a dry cleaner, and his father, Thomas, worked in construction. His father left when he was a baby, so he was raised by his mom and grandma, and different family members recount different types of abuse either by Claudia or the grandma, Irene. Either at the hands of Claudia or Irene, the children were physically beaten. Anthony and his siblings would watch as his nieces and nephews were stripped and beaten with electrical cord until they bled. It's unclear if Anthony was abused or just watched the abuse, but he did later state in interviews that he was beaten and sexually assaulted as a child. This was refuted by one of his nieces, but it's possible she wasn't aware of the abuse.
Neighbors and teachers remembered him as seeming well-adjusted as a kid. He had a small circle of friends, and many recalled him as being respectful, kind, and a good student. He took school seriously and had a love of chess. Even with the outward appearance of normalcy, Anthony's niece, who grew up in the family home with her 6 siblings after her mom died of a chronic illness, said his sadistic behavior started young. She later testified in court that Anthony was not abused as a child, but she had been badly abused by many in the house, including Anthony and some of the other boys. When she was just 10 years old, while Anthony was 11, they started raping her. His senior year of high school, he got his girlfriend, Twyla, pregnant with his daughter, Julie. At the age of 18, Anthony joined the Marines, where he seemed to thrive under the sense of order. He was named honor graduate at his boot camp, and the only recruit in his group to be automatically promoted from private to private first class. He served in the Marines for 7 years and was known for being a good Marine. In 1981, he married fellow recruit Kim Yvette Lawson, who said she mostly married him to help keep him in line so he didn't drink himself out of the military. He had developed a drinking problem, and at one point, he was knocked down from sergeant to corporal after an alcohol-related incident with a military police officer in Okinawa.
He was stationed in North Carolina, California, and Okinawa, and while his first recorded rape/attempted murder was Melvette, there were rumors of other assaults by Anthony while he was stationed in Okinawa. He later confessed to a fellow inmate that he would hire sex workers to act out his fantasies of bondage and choking. A friend of his in the military confirmed that he had talked about having a thing for choking sex workers as well. It's never been confirmed if those acts were consensual, but based on his rape of his niece along with his other crimes, it would not be a big surprise if Anthony had other victims that were either not reported or not taken seriously. On January 15, 1985, he was honorably discharged from the Marines with ribbons such as a Sharpshooter Award and a Good Conduct Medal. Kim divorced him in 1985 when she was discharged, but it's unclear why. She died in an accident at work in the early 90s and was never interviewed about his crimes, so there's no record of abuse from Anthony, though it seems like he treated most of his girlfriends pretty well based on their accounts. Anthony returned to his home on Page Avenue, the same place where he would later rape Melvette, after his discharge in 1985. The neighborhood where his family had grown up had seen a huge economic downturn in recent years, and crack addiction was spreading quickly. He had a hard time adjusting to the world outside of the military. He shared the attic apartment with his nephew, and Anthony took a lot of pride in keeping his small space tidy and orderly.
Coming back to regular life, he was depressed, and his high school girlfriend recalled he had lost his playfulness. He seemed meaner. He started drinking heavily, often starting in the morning, and couldn't keep a job. Anthony said he would often drink so much he would black out. His sister, Tressa, believed he was likely making money selling drugs at this time. After Melvette's rape, a warrant was issued for Anthony, who was on the run. On June 24, 1990, Anthony struck again. This time, his victim was a 31-year-old pregnant woman. He spent the night drinking with her in a house in Cleveland. At some point, he pulled her upstairs, where he choked and raped her. She told him she was pregnant and begged him to stop, but he continued to attack her. Again, Anthony fell asleep after the attack, and the woman was able to get away and report him. He was still asleep when police arrived at the house to arrest him, but the unknown victim didn't want to press charges. Without her testimony, her case was dropped, but officials were able to finally try him for Melvette's assault. On September 12, 1990, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison for kidnapping, rape, and attempted murder. In prison, Anthony again thrived under the strict set of rules. He was said to be a model prisoner. He worked in the dining hall as a line server. He joined 2 12-step programs and attended classes like Cage Your Rage and Living Without Violence. Despite his good behavior, he served his full 15-year sentence and was released on June 20, 2005, at the age of 45.
Soon after his release, he moved into his stepmother's house at 12205 Imperial Avenue in Mount Pleasant. Soon after he moved in, his stepmother moved out to get medical care, and the second family who'd been living there left as well. He started working at a nearby factory, Custom Rubber. That summer, Anthony met the pretty, outgoing Lori Frazier, niece of Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. The two hit it off, and Anthony invited her out to dinner at a Chinese restaurant for food and drinks. Lori remembers thinking how charming he was and how easy it was to talk to him. They talked about her kids and grandkids and about how she wanted to go back to school. Lori went back to his house with him, and he told her he had to get up early for work the next day. The next morning, when Lori woke up, Anthony was gone. She came over to see him the next night, and soon they were dating.
She had been struggling with drug addiction since she was a teenager, and Anthony helped take care of her. He would cook for her, and she moved into his house on Imperial just weeks after they started dating. He had been supplying her with alcohol and crack, but not doing drugs himself. She would hang out at his house smoking, and then Anthony would drink beer and play video games. Their relationship deteriorated when Anthony started using himself. He had been kind and caring, but after he started using, his personality shifted. He started to turn mean and would fly into fits of rage. In April of 2006, Anthony got a tax refund check, which he mostly spent on drugs and partying. Lori came home to the house where he had young girls he was giving drugs to. At some point, she told friends Anthony had tried to kill her. They broke up. In February of 2007, Anthony had a heart attack after he stopped to help an elderly neighbor shovel snow from her driveway. He had a difficult recovery after having surgery to get a pacemaker. This made it very challenging to meet the physical demands at his job, and he was let go around mid-2007. With his health issues and a felony, it wasn't easy for him to find work, so he started scavenging scrap material like copper wire and aluminum siding to sell to construction crews.
38-year-old Crystal Dozier grew up in Cleveland. She was raised in King Kennedy Estates, a public housing complex. Her mom, Florence, worked hard to provide a safe home for her 4 kids. At just 13, Crystal had her first child. A year later, she was pregnant again with her 21-year-old boyfriend's child, who had a long arrest record. They had 5 more kids together by the time she was 21. Crystal did her best to stay in school, with family members helping babysit. She loved to sing and was in the school choir. Her older boyfriend made that impossible as he abused and trafficked her to buy drugs for himself. Crystal lived with her mom and kids until she was 17. One night, Florence awoke to the sound of Crystal's boyfriend beating her up. When she went to the kitchen, she found him choking Crystal. He said to Florence, "Go back in your room, bitch." To which badass Florence grabbed a knife and said, "Let her go or I'll show you how much of a bitch I can be."
Unfortunately, Crystal moved out of the house of her mother and in with her abuser. He also started assaulting their kids, and when Crystal was 21, CPS reported the two as unfit parents. The thought of losing her kids was the push she needed to leave her trafficker. She moved into her own apartment, but raising 7 kids on her own was just too much pressure for her, and her drug use escalated. She started staying out on benders for days at a time. Social workers ended up moving her kids out of her apartment and in with family and foster families. Her son, Anthony, said Crystal lost custody of him when he was 3. He didn't have a lot of memories of her because she wasn't around and they weren't close. He said he would find drug paraphernalia around the house, and he and his sister would often go hungry. He remembered keeping a jar of peanut butter in his backpack. The two of them would have a teaspoon of peanut butter for breakfast and another after school and a third for dinner, and that was all they had to eat.
On May 12, 2007, the day before Mother's Day, Crystal's son Anthony talked to her on the phone and stopped by to see her. He didn't call her on Mother's Day because he didn't want to wish her a happy Mother's Day. The next day on the 14th, he tried calling her, but she didn't answer. He thought maybe she was just upset with him because he hadn't called her to wish her a happy Mother's Day. The exact events that follow are a little unclear. Likely sometime around May 13th, Crystal met up with Anthony Sowell. The two had known each other since 2006. Crystal lived in a house on Imperial and would often party at his house with others. Crystal had been trading sex for crack, but she didn't consider herself a sex worker. That morning, she was seen by her roommate. She called Anthony and then put on a tank top and jeans to head by his party. The details of her rape and murder were unclear, but she had been bound at the hands and feet with coaxial cable. A knotted cloth was tied around her neck. 2 trash bags were wrapped around her naked body and were duct taped together. She was disposed of in a shallow hole in the backyard at 12205 Imperial.
Crystal's son, Anthony, one of her daughters, and her sister reported her missing. They were told that she was an adult and had the right to go missing. Looking back, her son believes it's so wrong to tell a family with a missing loved one this because it's not their job to take away somebody else's hope. His family continued checking on Crystal, calling the coroner, and seeing if she was in jail. A lot of time has passed for her son, and the resentment he felt for his mom as a kid has passed. He's a parent now and can appreciate who she was and what she was fighting at the time. She was loved and she was cared for. In June of 2007, neighbors on Imperial called the police to complain about a horrible smell on the street. This would come to be a regular occurrence. Health inspectors went to investigate, but they believed the smell was coming from Ray's Sausage Company across the street.
31-year-old Tashana Culver lived on Imperial just a few doors down from Anthony. Tashana was a beautician and a nursing student. She had always been an A student in school. She got pregnant her sophomore year, but she did graduate. After graduation, she started smoking crack, and things really took a turn for her after her boyfriend was found shot in the head. His death was ruled a suicide. Around this time, she checked herself into a treatment facility. Unfortunately, afterwards, she had a series of abusive relationships, and her drug abuse got worse. In 2001, she met her longtime boyfriend, Carl, who was also addicted. They went to rehab together and tried to get sober. Carl recalled memories of walking around Cleveland together in the brutal winter. Tashana didn't have winter boots, and he was so worried about her feet being cold as they walked around town. He gave her $120 to go get real snow boots, and she came back in a pair of moon boots. He said they were the ugliest shoes he had ever seen, but they were warm and they made her happy. Carl also didn't have winter boots, and he'd been tying plastic around his shoes to keep his feet dry. Tashana surprised him by using half the money he gave her to buy real boots for him too. She didn't want him to get sick from having wet feet.
The two were together for 7 years and had 3 kids together, but the kids were all living with family members. Tashana would trade sex for drugs, which Carl hated, but ultimately it was the only way they could get crack. For a while, Tashana actually left Carl and moved into a house on Imperial with her mom and sister. However, when they found out she was selling sex for drugs, they told her she had to leave so her children wouldn't find out. Tishana had been estranged from her family for about a year when she went missing. Like Crystal, the details of Tishana's murder are fuzzy. She'd been strangled with a long piece of fabric. Her hands had been bound with cloth. Her collarbone had been broken. She was left on the third floor of 12205 Imperial, wearing a brown shirt and brown pants, and stuffed in a trash bag.
LaShonda Long came from a history of addiction. Her mom, Jewel, had been on drugs, and her mom before her. She was born on March 19, 1984, and had a rough start. Her dad, Jim, worked as a corrections officer and tried to raise the kids with the help of his grandmother, but his grandma reported Jim and Jewel to the county for not being around enough for the kids. LaShonda ended up living with one of Jewel's sisters and really thrived at first. Eventually, as a teenager, she resented living with her aunt and went looking for her mom. She was first pregnant at 14 and had 3 kids over the next 3 years. She had legal trouble and ended up in a juvenile detention center and lost custody of her children. She started using crack, but her dad, Jim, said that no matter what was going on in LaShonda's life, she would always call him for his birthday. When he didn't get his birthday call in 2008, he knew something was wrong. LaShonda's murder is even less clear because her remains were mostly missing. Her skull was kept in a bucket in a basement on Imperial. The rest of her body was never found. It's believed she was killed in August of 2008.
37-year-old Vanessa Gay had loved going to school as a kid. She was an A student and even president of the National Junior Honor Society in high school. She had lots of dreams growing up and maybe wanted to be a cosmetologist or a welder or even a truck driver. Her parents got a divorce when she was little, and she remembered when her dad stopped showing up. She would sit in the front window just staring, waiting for him to come back. This was actually the way she learned about sex work. She would see women dressed up, meeting Johns on the street, and eventually put it together. Things didn't go as planned for Vanessa, and she found herself using crack. She got to a point that all she could do was think about it. She would stand at her sink in the kitchen and couldn't figure out how to wash the dishes. Her mind was blocked. All she could think about was crack.
Laundry was piling up. She lived with her husband, who was also using, and the two sold everything in their house to buy more. They sold their TVs and their kids' toys and bikes. At one point, her family did an intervention to try to get her help. She'd just gotten home from buying crack when she found her mom, cousin, 4 kids, neighbor, and son's friends on the front porch waiting for her. Vanessa had lost so much weight from drug use that she looked like a little girl. She was thin and her eyes were sunken. As a result of looking so young, she got more work as a sex worker. She did have rules for staying safe on the street. She would not get in a car with anyone she didn't know or anyone who looked strange. In early September of 2008, Vanessa was working. She was standing outside of a bank when a man walked past her with a bike on a cell phone. He walked past her again, and she had a feeling he wanted her attention. He told her, it's my birthday, and I don't have anyone to celebrate with. She responded, I don't celebrate birthdays, but happy birthday anyhow.
She wasn't sure if she should go with Anthony or wait for someone she knew. But as they started to walk together, people in the neighborhood were saying hi to him, which made her relax. The two chatted, and he said he didn't want to get high alone. She told him she liked to cook, and he said he could cook her under the table, and that he could make her pinto beans and brown gravy that would blow her mind. He talked about his time in the Marines and his love of chess. They got to his house on Imperial, and as soon as they walked in, it felt eerie. Up to this point, there had been no red flags, but things took a sharp turn. He started closing all of the windows and doors. Her gut told her to leave. There was a bad smell. She brought it up, and he said it was from the sausage factory. She also noticed a rotting whole chicken sitting out. They went up to the 3rd floor, and she was actually enjoying the conversation. He started pacing around, and she asked him what he was up to, and if they were about to smoke or drink or what they were going to do. Sitting there, she noticed the house was teeming with flies, which she assumed was from the spoiled food.
He asked her if she had a pipe, and she handed one to him. He turned his back. She heard the sound of a lighter and a sizzle, and then suddenly, he spun around and punched her in the face. He said, "Take your clothes off, bitch." She took her clothes off like he asked while looking into his eyes. She had never seen anyone with eyes so evil. His eyes looked like black holes. There wasn't even a small glimmer of light. He raped her for hours. He raped her orally and vaginally while raging about what other women had done to him and how women shouldn't be using crack instead of being at home with their families. She nodded in agreement to try to calm him. At one point, Anthony agreed to let Vanessa use the bathroom. On the way there was a black tarp hanging over a wall. The plastic was pulled back a bit, and she could see something was behind the tarp on the floor. It was a body without a head. She knew she couldn't let Anthony see her react to the horror.
They went back to his room, and they both fell asleep. She woke in the morning to Anthony's arm around her as if they were a couple. Anthony let her get dressed, and she asked if she could call her sister. He let her, and the two talked about making mac and cheese. She told him she was leaving, as if what had just happened was no big deal. He kept saying she would tell on him if he let her go, and she said, "Tell what? It might have been a little rougher than I'm used to, but what am I going to tell?" He went to get his keys to let her out the front door. She stayed by his side the entire time, afraid that if he got behind her, she wouldn't make it out. At the door, he gave her his phone number and told her to come back on Monday when he got paid. No, no, thank you.
Absolutely not.
She called the police to report what had happened, but they told her that she had to come down to the station to file a report. This was not the first time she had been raped, unfortunately, and when she tried to report a past experience, it went badly, and her attacker was acquitted. Stay tuned for more from Vanessa and her testimony a little later.
45-year-old Michelle Mason was just 16 when she left home to head to New York. She was known for her big, beautiful smile. Her family didn't hear from her for 5 years, and when she did come home, she contracted HIV from using drugs. She'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and seemed to do well when she was on medication to treat it. She had 2 sons, but she wasn't able to take care of them herself because of her addiction. Her mom and sister took care of her boys. She had spent quite a bit of time sober, but was still mostly living on the street. In the mid-2000s, Michelle was shot in the head after a dispute with a man who claimed she had unprotected sex with him without revealing she was HIV positive.
Michelle was last seen by her family in November of 2008. They reported her missing and hung up posters around the neighborhood, but have been very vocal about the police not helping with an investigation. With as many women who had now come up missing in the neighborhood, they couldn't understand why police had not done any digging, especially considering Anthony was a registered sex offender. On November 10th, she told a friend she was going out to have some fun. Michelle was strangled with an electrical cord, and her hands were bound behind her back. She was wrapped in clear plastic and buried in the yard at Imperial.
52-year-old Tanya Carmichael had been a smart, happy kid who loved 4-H. She was pregnant with her first child at the age of 16 and dropped out of high school as a result. She was a mother of 3. She struggled with drug addiction for years. She would sometimes stay away from home for days, but she always kept in touch with her family. Her family knew something was wrong when she hadn't picked up her paychecks from work in weeks. Her mother tried to file a missing persons report on December 2nd, but officers told her Tanya would come home when the drugs ran out. Tanya was murdered by strangulation with a phone charger wrapped around her neck. Her hands were bound behind her back, and she was buried in the yard on Imperial.
What's 4-H?
4-H is something kind of like the Girl Scouts-ish. It's something that I know is like big in the South, like with farming communities. It might even be like just farm related where actually Jenny, our good friend Jenny Robertson was in 4-H and like you would go and show like your cattle and you would kind of compete for like the best cows and like that sort of thing. And I was never in it, so I might not be giving it like the best description, but it was like a thing for kids to do to like show off like their, I think specifically farming like abilities.
So like farm style Girl Scouts or something.
Let us know if we're wrong about that, but I think that's it.
Yeah, we'd like to hear more about this, I think.
Yes.
At least if we're wrong.
Right.
If we already know it, then whatever.
Yeah. Well, then give us a pat on the back.
Yeah, we deserve one.
We'll take it.
We got one right. 39-year-old Gladys Wade was born in Cleveland with 2 hardworking parents. Her parents divorced when she was 9, but her dad stayed in her life. She loved music from a young age, and she sang and played the flute. Her uncle was a musician at Motown Records and encouraged her talent. She earned a music scholarship and toured Europe and the US with the school band. She was also a good student and planned on getting her bachelor's in music education. Her plans were derailed after a breakup with her boyfriend at the time. She moved to Dayton, Ohio, and started working as a nursing assistant. It was there that she started dating the man that introduced her to crack. She ended up losing her job and saw that as her sign to get help. She moved back to Cleveland to stay with her parents and got clean. She started working as a music tutor, and it seemed like things were back on track. Gladys had a short relapse after a car accident left her with chronic pain, but she was back to being sober by 2003.
On December 8th, 2009, Gladys took a bus home from her sister's around 5:30 p.m. She made a quick stop at Amira Imperial Beverage next to 12205 Imperial to get a beer and cigarettes. As she walked out of the store, Anthony approached her saying, "Merry Christmas. How about you come over to my place to have a beer?" He held up a paper bag with 2 beers inside. Gladys was not interested and said, "No thanks, I already have a beer, but Merry Christmas to you also." Anthony grabbed her from behind and hit her in the face. She blacked out and fell to the ground. He dragged her up his driveway by her coat collar, tightening it around her neck, making it hard to breathe. He pulled her up the steps to the 3rd story of his house, and she blacked out again. When she woke up, there was a Christmas tree set up, and her coat and sweater had been taken off, but Anthony was nowhere in view. She crawled over to a door, but it was locked. She screamed, and Anthony appeared. "Scream all you want. Nobody will hear you. You better get ready to die."
He got on top of her, and a fight ensued. They rolled down the stairs to the 2nd floor. During the struggle, Gladys put her hand through a plate of glass in the door. They kept fighting, rolling down to the 1st floor. She clawed at his face with her nails, and he choked her. She thought she was going to lose consciousness, and with her remaining energy, she grabbed his testicles through his pants and twisted as hard as she could.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what we learned in, I guess, self-defense classes when I was like in junior high, and then we did a little gym class segment. They were like, I'll never forget it because the method was like to go straight for the testicles, grab, twist, pull, and release, they say. I remember that lesson, and I'm like, in what world are we ripping their testicles off their body?
This world is the time to do that, Gladys.
We can help,
It's a very useful skill. It's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
If you are being dragged into a strange man's house and he has taken off your clothes, absolutely
go for the balls.
The balls.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He kneeled over in pain, and she was able to get the door open and bolt outside. She made it down to Best Chicken and Pizza to get help. She told the men inside to call the police because a man had just tried to kill her. Her hand was bleeding badly, and she had clearly been through a fight. They told her they didn't want anything to do with it and to get out because she was bleeding on their floor. Gladys did report her attack and told the officers where he lived. Officers went to his house, and from the window, they could see blood on the walls and ground, like Gladys had described. Anthony was ultimately arrested, but was released because the sex crimes detective told Gladys she wasn't a credible witness. 6 more women were murdered after her attack.
Terrible. 44-year-old Kim Yvette Smith went by Candy. She was an artist and a talented singer. She was beautiful and got a lot of attention from men at a young age. She started using drugs her senior year of high school. She graduated and attended community college for art and dance. Her parents split up when she was young, but she stayed close to her dad, Donald, who said she was his heart and he really cared about her recovery. He helped her get into a few drug rehab programs, but he said she would get off one drug and start another. Her father had a surgery that left him in a wheelchair, and Kim had a new motivation to get sober so she could take care of her father, who was so important to her. On January 17th, 2009, Kim went shopping with her aunt to get new clothes to sing in their church choir. She was really trying to get her life together. She took her dad out for Chinese food and then headed over to her boyfriend's place. She never made it there and seemed to disappear into thin air. Kim was murdered with her hands and feet tied with cloth. She was wrapped in plastic and buried in the yard. She was the only victim who didn't have kids.
43-year-old Nancy was a grandmother of 5 and had been working in construction. She had 3 kids and doted on her grandkids. She loved taking them to the park. She was a hard worker, but started using crack after a bad bout of depression. On April 29, 2009, she spent the day with her family. She went to make a quick run to a local store and said she would be right back, but she never returned. Her daughter reported her missing and posted signs around the neighborhood, but she said police didn't offer much help. Nancy was strangled with a cloth tied around her neck, and her wrists were tied with rope. She was wrapped in black plastic bags and a comforter and put in a 3rd-story crawl space.
Imelda Amy Hunter was 47 when she went missing. She was actually the cousin of Crystal Dozier, who was murdered in May of 2007. When Amy was 14, she'd been impregnated by a teacher who got her drunk at a party and raped her. Her daughter was born deaf and with cerebral palsy. She was in a relationship with an older man who didn't like her drug use and tried to get her to quit. She worked as a hairstylist and a home health aide. She loved reading and especially loved Charles Dickens. Her son said she would often go missing when she was on benders, but they spent a lot of time together cooking and singing. Amy had known Anthony for a while, and they often partied together. She called him her buddy, and she always talked about how nice he was. She disappeared in April of 2009. She was strangled using a strap of a suitcase and was wrapped in heavy-duty trash bags. She was buried in a shallow grave in the yard.
48-year-old Janice Webb had long struggled with her crack addiction. She tried to get clean many times over several decades, but inevitably found her way back. She stayed in touch with her family throughout the years and could always be counted on to show up to family parties and holidays. She spoke with her sister, Audrey, almost every day. Audrey said Janice knew she was loved. The last time they spoke, Janice said she was coming over, but she never did. When she came up missing in June of 2009, her family hung up missing posters all over town. Mysteriously, the posters on Imperial were always taken down. Janice was strangled with a green belt, and her hands were tied with shoelaces in the front of her body. She was gagged with a shirt. She was covered in a mound of dirt in the basement.
30-year-old Talacia Fortson was a mother of 3. As a kid, she loved writing poetry, styling hair, and arranging flowers. Talacia was adopted by her mom, Inez, when she was 9 years old. Inez had always wanted a daughter, and the two had an instant connection. Talacia had feelings of abandonment after hopping between foster families and struggled to adjust. She started taking drugs when she was 14 and would often run away from home. Her addiction got worse, and she lost custody of her kids after a social worker said she didn't finish a drug rehab program. Talacia was devastated and had her kids' names tattooed. She sometimes lived on the streets or in shelters, and sometimes with Inez. On June 3, 2009, Talacia brought a bag of groceries for Inez. She stayed over to chat, cook, and clean the house. Talacia kissed Inez on the forehead as she left, saying, "I'll see you next week." That was the last time she saw Talacia. She was strangled using a cloth. She was wearing a sleeveless shirt, and her bottoms had been removed. A kitchen knife was found inside of her body. She was placed in the 3rd-floor sitting room.
38-year-old Diane Turner worked in a Jamaican restaurant in Cleveland. She had 5 children, but she had lost custody due to drug use. Losing her kids caused her to go deeper into a spiral of guilt and shame. Diane disappeared in September of 2009. Her coworkers noticed she had stopped coming to work, but she was not reported missing to police. Her body was badly decomposed, and the cause of death was listed as homicidal violence. Her ankles were wrapped in a black plastic bag. Her body was placed in the 3rd-floor sitting room close to Talacia's. On September 22, 2009, authorities stopped by Anthony's house, not to investigate any of the missing women or the awful smell coming from his house, but to verify that he was still at the same home in accordance with his parole guidelines.
Later that day, he met up with 36-year-old Latunda Lala Billups. Lala grew up hearing how addictive crack was and how people would do anything to get it. She'd been a good kid, but when she turned 13 or 14, she just wanted to go out to parties. She started disobeying her mom and hanging out with friends, drinking and smoking pot. One night, a friend she was partying with started smoking crack, and Lala asked to try it. It was a rush that went all over her body. In the beginning, she smoked once a week, then a few times a week, then she had someone supplying her. Soon she was buying her own, and not long after, she hit a point that she ran out of money. Lala moved to Imperial in 2007, but she had known Lori Frazier since they were teens. She had smoked with Lori and the man she knew as Tone a bunch of times, even after Lori left. She would hang out with Anthony from time to time.
That night, Lala was standing in front of a store when Anthony walked by. He was carrying 2 40s, and she called out to him, "Where are you going? Can I have some beer with you?" He invited her to his house. They headed to the second floor, but when they'd hung out together in the past, they always partied in the attic. She asked him why they weren't going upstairs, and he said it was dirty. Janice and Diane's bodies were already lying in the open upstairs. They smoked together, and then he brought her to another room. Inside, there was a piece of cut cable cord and a blanket on the ground. He brought in a chair. He asked her to turn around, and she thought she was just showing him how she looked. He put his hands around her neck and started squeezing. She pushed him. He hit her in the face hard. He ripped her shirt and made her turn on her stomach and pulled the cable around her neck. She blacked out. He raped her.
When she woke up, her neck was burning and she was wet from beer that had spilled on the ground. Anthony was sitting in front of her in the chair. She told him she was leaving, and he told her he was going to kill her and then himself because he knew he was going to jail. She told him he wasn't going to jail, but she wasn't coming back, and started to get dressed. Lala told him she thought he was her friend, but then he ripped her sweater. At this point, it seemed like his rage had passed, and he told her he would pay her back for it. He apologized and said he'd been going through a lot. Anthony walked her downstairs and stood in the doorway watching her go. As she got to the corner of the street, out of his line of sight, she took off running. Lala reported the rape, and a rape kit was done. She wasn't contacted by the police for 3 weeks.
51-year-old Sean Morris had struggled with addiction, but had gone through many stints of rehab. She would stay sober for a couple of years, but ultimately relapse. In October of 2009, she had mostly been off drugs and had been doing her best to stay busy and out of trouble. On October 19th, she cleaned around the house and went to Bible study in Mount Pleasant. She met up with a friend for a drink, which turned into partying at a friend's house. Around 5:30 a.m., Sean and some friends headed to a gas station that would open soon so they could buy beer. A man got off a bus and approached the group asking for a cigarette. He introduced himself as Tone and bought them all wine and beer. They all drank together, and around 7 a.m., Anthony invited Sean over. She knew her husband would be upset that she had stayed out all night, so she decided to delay the fight a little longer. But once inside, Anthony lit some incense and put on music. They smoked and drank together, and she went to leave around 9. Anthony walked her to the door to say goodbye, but as Sean walked down the street, she realized she'd left her ID inside.
Oh, so close. Anthony let her back in, and as she walked upstairs, he put her in a chokehold. He told her if she screamed, fought, or tried to get away, he would kill her. Once upstairs, he ordered her to take off her clothes and raped her. At one point, Sean screamed from the pain, and Anthony got up to close the windows. She realized he was going to kill her, and she spotted one window he hadn't closed. She said a prayer and asked God not to let her die because she knew she was about to jump out the window. She went to the window and kicked out the screen. She climbed outside and planned on lowering herself down to the ground from the 2-story window. Anthony tried to stop her and pulled her back in. When he realized he wasn't strong enough, he just pushed her down, causing her to fall hard on the pavement below. She fell naked, fracturing her skull and breaking 8 ribs. Security footage from a nearby store actually recorded the whole scene, from Sean falling out to Anthony coming out to try to get her back in the house while naked. You can see a snippet of that footage in the documentary Unseen.
A neighbor saw her fall and called the police. An ambulance arrived and took her to the hospital. Aside from her injuries from Anthony, Shawn had a brain aneurysm and had to undergo brain surgery. When she awoke days later, she asked for a phone to call her husband. The nurse told her that her husband had been in the ambulance with her, and Shawn said that was not her husband. Shawn was afraid Anthony would track her down, so she told police officers who had been called to the scene that Anthony was her boyfriend, and it had been an accident.
One of the most frustrating things about this case is police had actually stayed with Shawn at the hospital for quite a bit of it, providing protection, because even when they believed that Anthony was her husband, they knew this was a domestic violence situation. Like he had told police that she had fallen out the window while they were having sex and like it just got out of hand. And they didn't believe it for a second. Like they knew that wasn't the real story of what had happened.
Yeah.
But then they didn't follow up. They know at the very least this is a domestic violence situation. And at the worst, they have a freaking serial killer in their hands.
Yeah, that shows just total lack of regard, just no care for these people at all, which, it's obvious something is awry. And it's obvious that even if she's going to say, oh, it was an accident, like they shouldn't just leave it at that. But it's easier to ignore, I guess, than to actually do your job.
On October 27, 2009, Lala finally heard from the police and she met up with detectives about her rape. A warrant was issued for Anthony. On the 29th, a SWAT team arrived at Anthony's house, but he wasn't there. The bodies of Janice and Diane were found just lying in the attic. Police returned on the 30th and found 4 more bodies, 2 more in the attic, 1 in the basement, and 1 in the yard. In all, they found the remains of 11 women. By Halloween, the media had been alerted that a serial killer was on the loose, and the manhunt began. Parents were worried about letting their kids trick-or-treat, and the whole community was on edge. Anthony's half-sister, Tressa, saw him out on the street. He was just out there in plain sight. He told her everything they were saying was true. He didn't know why he did it, and he was just fucked up in the head.
Anthony was still just walking around, not far from home, when he was spotted by an officer. He was walking around in a hoodie and told officers, I know I look like him, but I'm not Sowell. While being interrogated, Anthony admitted to having dreams about hurting the women by wrapping his hands around their necks. He talked about his anger towards women and how they should stop smoking crack and take care of their kids. As if he wasn't using crack and as if he was taking care of his daughter, Julie. On December 1st, 2009, Anthony was charged with 85 counts, including murder, rape, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse.
Many of his victims, including Vanessa Gay, gave powerful testimony of the brutality they'd endured. You can find Vanessa's full testimony on YouTube, and we've included a link. Here's a snippet as she describes her walk from the bedroom to the bathroom.
I'm thinking, this is how it's gonna end. This is how it's gonna end when I did what he said.
How long has this taken place, this ordeal that you're speaking of?
When the rape stopped, it was getting light outside, so it had to be early in the morning.
Okay, so several hours had gone by?
Yes.
Did you ask him if you could use another room?
I finally got up the nerve to ask him, could I use the bathroom?
What was his reaction to that?
He told me, after a few minutes, he told me I could.
As you walked to the bathroom, did you notice anything about the room on the left? We need you to describe in detail, Ms. Gay, what you saw there.
The plastic was pulled up and out the corner of it. As I'm walking, I look, and it was propped up, sitting on the floor, and there was taped up, and then it had no head on it.
One of the creepiest parts about this portion of her testimony is how everyone in the courtroom is affected by her story, but Anthony just sits there blankly. Families of the victims gave impact statements letting Anthony know the women did have families and were loved. Danita, the daughter of Tanya Carmichael, said, quote, I'll never forgive you. The way you sat here during these court proceedings without an ounce of remorse. The only time you showed any emotion was when your family tried to defend you or spoke about some sentimental memory that brought a tear to your eye. Well, we've been crying since November 10th, 2008. You thought these women were worthless, that no one knew they were gone, that no one cared about them. You were wrong.
Gladys Wade, a survivor, said, quote, I just want to say that he didn't kill me, but he killed what I was. On July 22nd, 2011, 11 years ago today, Anthony was found guilty of all but 2 counts. He was sentenced to death. Throughout the years, Anthony appealed his sentence many times, but his appeal was ultimately rejected. He died on February 8, 2021, of a terminal illness, sparing him the lethal injection. Survivors of Anthony's attacks, especially Vanessa, continue to speak out about the failures of the social justice system, how they were not listened to by police, how the case against Anthony pivoted on their testimony, but they were not given any support, whether it be counseling or financial help, after the trial. In 2016, Lala went back to school and earned her master's in social work. She turned her life around and has healed through helping others.
When Vanessa was asked how her rape had changed her, she said, I'm still not fully changed. I'm still in that cocoon because I'm still just trying to sort things out. I'm still finding my place and my way and how to keep moving forward. I don't take life for granted. And as I mentioned, she's talking about this in the great documentary, which we have linked in here, Unseen. And she's done many interviews that I've linked to in our sources throughout the years about how the city just abandoned the victims. Like, they didn't offer any counseling, any mental health help. They like kind of pushed them to testify at court to make sure they got the conviction and acted like they were going to support them, and then completely dropped them after that. And there was actually a payout. I forget how much it was. I know it's in one of the articles for maybe like $1.5 million or $3 million or something going to the families of the victims, but it did not go to the survivors.
What? Wow.
And it's like, who was let down? Like, I mean, they were all let down by the police, but like so many of them went to the police and were completely ignored.
Yeah.
And the reason why that money went to them in the first place was because of the mishandling by the police. So why wasn't Vanessa given a payout for this? Like, it's just horrendous.
Yeah, as she has to live with the effects of the trauma that she endured for the rest of her life, and with no assistance. Yeah, that's brutal. That's not how you solve or close a case. It's not just like, well, we know who did it and whatever, he's dead. Who cares?
This is a pretty recent
it's
one,
like,
too.
It doesn't end there.
This is only in the past 10 years. So we can do better.
Yeah, it's like there's so many cases where they're always saying, oh, yeah, and in the 80s, in the 90s, it was more like this. So that's what happened. Well, guess what? It still happens, even though it's, quote, not like that today.
And like, I wanted to point this out that, it was like great hearing the survivor interviews in that documentary. And it's so great that Lala went back to school and, she's really found joy in helping others through social work. But like, as a survivor, you don't have to do that. Like, that's great if that helps you, but you can be mad every day of your life. Like,
just surviving is impressive on its own. And like, enduring any of it is impressive on its own, and continuing to just exist is like
just
a feat.
Existing.
So
like, you did it.
Mm-hmm.
So she's really powerful. Definitely go listen to that. She's just incredible. Like, every article I read with her, like this next little bit coming up, like, she's just so impressive. So kind of wrapping this up, in December of 2011, the city of Cleveland demolished the house at 12205 Imperial Avenue. Vanessa again pointed out that the survivors of Ariel Castro, and if you're not familiar with Ariel Castro, he imprisoned several women, 3 women, in a house in Cleveland for years and impregnated them, and they finally escaped. Also, like maybe within the last 10 years. Does that sound right? I'm not sure.
I think it's probably just a little over 10 years ago.
Yeah. I think it was when I was living in Ohio. I think like I had heard about this, and I actually thought there was a chance that this could have been a boyfriend of my best friend at the time, who had actually kidnapped me, which we'll tell that story at another time. But his name was also Ariel. And I heard this case break, and I'm like, oh my God, is it Ariel that did this? Like, has he been like holding these women hostage all this time? Because after he kidnapped kidnapped me at gunpoint, it sounded like something
Plausible.
he would do.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounded very plausible. It was not him. It was a different Ariel. But so anyways, Vanessa pointed out that these women got a memorial from the city. They got a memorial garden, which she thought was wonderful. Like, that's great. Like, these women, what they went through, like, let's definitely do great things for them and support them. But the victims of Anthony Sowell did not. They were not given anything. They just demolished the house and were moving on, making the community worse, honestly, at this point. Because now there's, like, who wants to live in this bad place where there's, like, demolished houses and such? So this is not helping anyone in any way. But I'm assuming in part because of Vanessa speaking up, finally in 2021, a garden named Garden of 11 Angels was dedicated to the 11 victims at the site where the house once stood and where they were murdered.
Wow. That is a doozy.
It's a doozy. And, this is quite a bit longer than normal because there were so many survivor stories, which just meant there was so much information. And I wanted to make sure, like, their whole stories were told to give them justice and make sure their voices are heard.
That's what we're always missing with murder victims in similar situations. Often, like, there's not much left to say about them after they've passed and they're not there to speak up for themselves. So it's so nice to be able to hear things from people who did manage to escape, thank God, because if they didn't, this guy might have just got away with this forever. So
agreed. And so amazing that, like, they all got together, they all spoke up and whatever.
That is a fight, and a fight that might never get you anywhere. So I can't even imagine mustering the courage and the energy to put towards that when all along no one's been listening to you, no one's been giving a shit. So why should they now? But you still know it's right. So you're true. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's a really dynamic story. I definitely recommend checking out the books and doing a deeper dive on.
I want to see that documentary.
The documentary is wonderful. It's on Amazon. It's $1 to rent the standard definition version. And I should just give you my Amazon login because it's really good. Like, the women are, like, just so engaging too. Like, they're just incredible. Like, they all have a good sense of humor. They all are good storytellers. Like, you just really care about them at the end of it. Like, you just want to give them all a hug. Like, they, like, what they went through, and just the fact that they have, like, any ounce of joy or humor, like, left after what they went through is just, it's great. Like, they're all great speakers.
There's a couple of really interesting things that stick out to me too. One being this guy, Anthony, had no shortage of friends. Like, he's just hanging out with people and women all the time and having lots of sex, having lots of friends. Like, what is his problem? Like, honestly, it's a lot of people act out being like, well, I'm a loner and no one really paid attention to me like I deserve. But, like, this guy, what were his complaints? There's no complaints. Like, that's just
I don't know.
Absurd.
And his, like, hate of women, like, it clearly started at a young age. And
but for doing the same shit he does, which is
Yeah, and I did not reveal the identity of his niece because, like, in testimony, it wasn't revealed. They do kind of talk about his nieces that lived in the house in the book. So, like, you can, like, not that I suggest, like, going and trying to find that information out and doxing anyone. But it's just really interesting with the nieces because the one niece, and I'm not sure if it's the one that he was raping, but she was abused by the mom or the grandma. And according to her, it was like the nieces and nephews that were getting the abuse, and, like, the mom and grandma loved, like, their kids, but, like, they saw them as being outsiders once their mom died. And she said that Anthony just took, like, great joy in watching her being beaten, and that's kind of where this idea got in his head to use the wires and, like, whatever, because that's what they would use to beat her with.
Wow.
And it just, like, lit something that already existed in him.
Just, like, fucked up from the start. Yeah, because it's like you would think that seeing that as a young person would traumatize you instead of inspire you.
So upsetting to think about.
Yeah. The other thing that blows my mind is just the parts of it that happened in public, just knocking people out right on the street, just dragging someone right up the stairs for everyone to see.
That was shocking to me.
And I'm like, I was just thinking about when I go out to take out the garbage, I'm like, I'm worried that if I'm wearing the wrong thing, everyone's going to notice me. But how the fuck do people not notice their neighbors just knocking out people, just dragging a lifeless body
wild.
around. Like, what the fuck?
It's wild. And that one really shocked me too. That was like Sean's survival story. And because like most of them, he'd gotten them in his house. And then, if they're like, it is an old house. The construction was probably like a bit better. Like a lot of these places were like designed to be mansions. So like it's possible people wouldn't have heard them screaming inside.
And they're like,
he
they're
gagged a lot of
detached
people, as we know.
houses. And yeah.
But that one, like hitting her in front of the store, like it was in December at 5 p.m. So like it would have been getting like
maybe.
dark out.
Yeah.
But still, like there would have been people out.
Yes.
That's like a busy time.
Yeah.
It's apparently quite close to a bus stop.
Well,
that's
like
where
someone
Sean
works
had
at
gotten
the
off.
store. Someone, people were driving by. Like
talking about the store. So I didn't really touch on it during the main story because I just don't want to give this guy any kind of platform. But like the store owner is interviewed in Unseen, the documentary, and this man's opinion is just right in the garbage. Like he's like the worst human ever. I put a note about his actual statement here. Let me find it because this is awful. He owned the store and apparently he was on Team Anthony. He really liked Anthony and he clearly also hates women and like had no problem. Like he mentioned that he knew Anthony had started using crack and he saw his appearance change. But here's what he said about Anthony and finding out he had killed these women and maybe disposed of LaShonda's body in his garbage.
Yeah.
Like that's maybe where he had disposed of her.
Okay.
So he said, I wish we had a million Anthony Sewells. He'd clean up the garbage.
Oh.
Fuck that guy.
He is the garbage. That's fucked up. Yeah.
It's really messed up.
It's like, I mean, like this guy should have to face some sort of charge or some sort of, like you can't just like, you witness something and you're like, yeah, but, I like the people that he chooses to kill. That helps. Like having that opinion and just seeing or possibly witnessing in some capacity something and then doing nothing about it because you straight up don't care or you share this guy's feelings about these women.
That's it. And he could have seen what Anthony did to Sean that night, though. Like to say, like, I guess nobody saw it.
And that should be criminal too. Yeah, that's
for sure.
Fucked. Ugh, gross.
Yeah.
So on a lighter note, I guess, what else are you watching? Well, I guess let's hear about all these, all the recommendations you have with this story and others.
Yeah. So, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, all the documentaries, obviously go watch Unseen. It's just great. It's $1. And then I had mostly gone down a tangent, researching, the crack era and which is something like I'd seen 13 years ago, and it's like incarceration for drug offenses is something like I'm quite like, loosely aware of. And then this other documentary that I've listed, which is called like the cocaine crack, whatever, like if you look up crack on Netflix, it's going to be the first thing that pops up. It's done by a Black filmmaker. Which is great because this is the kind of story that should be told through that lens.
Yes.
And it's newer. Like, I don't know if you've seen it. It came out like probably in the past year.
No, I don't think.
Yeah, it's great. And it just talks about, like similar to 13, it talks about the politics that went into creating this situation with like drugs entering and presidents looking the other way.
The war on drugs,
and like how the war of drugs came to be. And it's really insightful for like the Bush and Reagan administrations and like what was going so badly that created this situation.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously the more and like I'm so resentful that like even now at my age, I'm still learning more and more just lies and weird angles that were taken to present information about drugs to me throughout the course of my life. And I'm like,
they talk about the Just Say No campaign and how that came to be.
Oh my God. The drug education in like middle school is despicable. It's just fear mongering. And then like the war on drugs is obviously the war on people of color because as you mentioned, white people aren't penalized for very similar situations.
Yeah.
It's just
identical
like, well,
situations.
oh, poor them. They got into
Yeah.
drugs. And it's like, yeah, well, poor everyone that got into drugs. Like, Jesus
that
Christ.
should be the thought process. It is
Yeah.
a disease.
And then, like, I've been watching the documentary series. I think it's called Changing Your Mind or How to Change Your Mind or something. It's about psychedelic drugs. And they're talking about basically why all the research stopped in psychedelic drugs as well, relative to the war on drugs. Because at first, they were all sorts of doctors and just interested people doing tests and just trying to find out, like, do some trials and see where the benefits were and all of this. And then, of course, the government got a hold of LSD and decided to do their own tests on whether or not they could do mind control with it. And then finding that that wasn't going to do it for them, they were just like, well, fuck all of these drugs and
illegal.
all of these people and just end all the studies and just like, it's over. And it's like, that's so ridiculous because now we know, of course, that a lot of the psychedelic drugs are amazing tools when it comes to mental health problems.
Absolutely.
And like, often permanent solutions or like non-invasive solutions without lasting side effects of like other sort of treatment options. And it's disgusting that we've all had that withheld from us just for the sake of being able to arrest more people of color.
Yeah.
Like,
it's so true. It's so true. And like we're seeing more and more places decriminalize all drugs, which is great.
Like where you're at sounds really great.
In British Columbia. And like if anybody is in or around British Columbia, in Vancouver, we have a couple of mushroom dispensaries now that also sell LSD and some like microdosing kinds of things. You can buy like an amount to trip, but it's not like my thing to do.
No,
so I
that's
bought
scary.
some like mushroom microdosing because like I just really am trying to deal with my seasonal affective disorder with it being cloudy and rainy here every day. And it's been very nice. Like it really does make me feel creative in a small amount. And I'm like definitely not hearing colors.
It doesn't have to be all or nothing. There's like microdosing is amazing.
Perfectly like functional. I can write, I can focus, I can like do normal tasks and in a less depressed form, which is great.
I was so surprised when I first tried mushrooms because I just had no idea what that was like, I guess. And I was kind of like averse to it because, of course, of my drug education and whatever else stories from punks and things. But I'm like, okay, whatever, give it a try. And then I realized that like it's difficult to explain, but it's just like my brain. It's like when you fall into some sort of a depression, it's like you just can't see outside of it. Like, it's like your brain is just spinning in circles and you're just repeating the same negative sentence over and over again to yourself.
Right.
You can't see a way out of it. But it's like you do the mushrooms and then it's like something just opens up and you're like, oh, I understand how to get to that happy. Like, that makes sense. The path is clear. And like criminalizing that or just demonizing that in any capacity is very wrong.
I find it quite expansive too. And, you know, maybe it's not for everyone.
No, surely.
And, for me, I was like, as soon as I could, I was like, I will try every drug. I like definitely did not care about the just say no to drug campaign in high school and was like, if you will give me a drug, I will eat it or snort it or
whatever you tell me to do with it, I'm going to do it.
So I had mushrooms like pretty young. I honestly don't like a full experience. It can be a little too much for me at this age. Like I find I just get kind of like weird on a lot of things now. But
I do have to say that regardless, like if you have a bad trip, like it's not fun, but it's still nowhere near like how it was represented in these terrible drug education situations. Because I thought it would just be
demons.
like total ego death. Like you're like the whole world is over. Like you'll never get back to, you know, and it's not like any of that at all. You're just kind of like, wow, this is uncomfortable. I don't want to do it anymore. It's not that bad.
I would like to go to sleep now. How about you? What have you been watching?
Well, at the recommendation of our friend Courtney, who took all of our delightfully spooky photos that you may see around, she told me about this show on Netflix called Boo Bitch, which I started watching. Have you been watching?
I haven't watched it, but I've seen it pop up, and I
so
knew it was designed just for me.
Yeah, it's really cute. Yeah, exactly. People just like us. Any spooky bitch. Yeah, it's like a high school comedy kind of thing, except that the main character dies at the beginning, and so she is a ghost going to high school, and she's trying to find out, like, okay, I guess ghosts are here because they have unfinished business, so like I should date the guy that I was trying to see or what? And like she's trying to like finish her business, and like
That's cute.
It's very cute. So I dig
love it. Isn't it also like a line in Mean Girls, like boo bitch?
It very well could
Regina
be.
George thing?
Yeah, it sounds likely.
I'm looking it up right now. Don't worry.
Okay, you're on it.
Did I make that up? Oh no, it's Boo You Whore.
Oh, well, I mean, that would be another.
A little different.
Yeah. I also watched a movie called My Daughter's Killer, which is like a French movie, but it's got a weird kind of distracting sort of English voiceover, whatever. But anyway, it's watchable. And the cool thing about it is the movie is really not sensational. It's really just matter of fact, and they're really just laying out the facts. And even still, it's like you get to certain points where you're like, excuse me, what? And it's just like, how can they say that just by being like, yep, this is the fact, this is what happened. And you're just like, it's sensational on its own. It's like, basically the situation is this little girl, her name was Kalinka Bambersky. Her parents divorced, and she was living with her mom and stepdad, and she died. And her dad, who didn't live with her, heard about her death, which was ruled of natural causes, and she was like 11 or something. And he was like, this seems weird to me. Like, I feel like she was fine. Like, I don't know what the heck.
Right.
And so then he asked for her autopsy report.
Right.
He had to chase people down to get the autopsy. He had to just hound everyone to get any information ever, because everyone was just willing to just close this up like that and be like, yeah, sure, 11-year-old girl dropped dead, the end. And he was like, well, something's fucking weird. I suspect the stepdad, who seems kind of weird to me. And basically, he was dealing with, I guess this happened in Germany, but the girl was French, so the dad was living in France. So it's between Germany and France. And in the 90s, which the law was really strange in Germany. But like, you know, even though things have changed, as you mentioned, you know, the same kind of things kind of persist. But the law at the time was marital rape is not illegal, for one thing. Generally, rape is laughable, not even something that we need to concern ourselves with. Like, nobody ever took women especially seriously, any victims of any kind of sexual assault. It was just a game. It was just a whatever. It was just part of life. No one was interested in pursuing any criminal convictions or dealing with or discussing that at all. So it's a difficult climate for this guy to bring up, oh, I think maybe the stepdad was like sexually assaulting her or whatever. And they're looking at this guy and going, I mean, what's your problem? Like, you're the scorned ex-husband or some shit? Like, you're trying to start some drama because you want to get back at your wife? Is that your deal? And he's like, no, my daughter is dead. That's my deal. And they're like, well, whatever, you know? And like, he had to fight for years and years and years to get any kind of information. And you'll see, as things unfold, it doesn't get a heck of a lot better. Even though things get proven, different things get opened up, you start realizing how deep this runs. Like, this stepdad was a doctor as well, who had a bad history with patients, but that didn't matter either. So it's just like to show how long people are able to get away with things, and how, even though you have like amazing people advocating for you and just never willing to let it go, sometimes there's still no tangible result, which is disgusting.
So sad and true.
Yeah. So sad, but it's a good movie.
Nice.
I would recommend.
One last little thing. I just wanted to give out a shout out to our amazing friend CJ at Beyond the Rainbow podcast. She covered a story this week on her podcast that could like really use everybody's help and attention if you have a few minutes. I made a note about the case here. It's about Christopher Mckinney, who was murdered in Louisville. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Outside of a dance club by a bouncer, and like basically people just like watched him die on a sidewalk, and he is in the LGBTQ plus community. And basically police are just not doing anything with this case and saying he died on accident. And like clearly the bouncer that took him out was on probably cocaine and was drunk and killed him. And It's a really sad case. So go give the most recent episode of Beyond the Rainbow a listen. And then there's a petition to get his case reopened. And his family could really use your help with that.
Well, I guess that's enough murder for 1 week. If you need just a smidge more murder, you can always find us on the OG MurderMurder.news for the latest breaking true crime news all week long.
You can find us on Instagram at MurderMurder News, on Twitter at Murder News, on TikTok at MurderMurder News, and on Facebook just by searching for MurderMurder News.
And when you search MurderMurder News on Facebook, you will also see our group pop up, and you'll want to hit that join button to stay in the loop about any upcoming events we might have and to join our virtual book club. We're currently reading Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel. We'll meet on Zoom to discuss it on Sunday, July 31st, and we hope to see you all there.
Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts if you're enjoying the show. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to make sure you never miss an episode.
Have a great week.
Bye, friends.